This is called Simply the Truth, and I'm a Christian.
Yes.
But I watch a lot of different people interpreting what's going to happen in the last days. John Hagee, for example, and a lot of different programs that are on. Where do you see this going as far as the rapture's concerned and everything else? Where's your stance on it? Because it's so confusing to a lot of people.
Right. Well, we will share. In fact, one of the questions we want to look at, and we were going to look at some scriptures, so we might as well begin by looking a little bit at what was in 1 Thessalonians and this whole area of the rapture. The other night, this came up when I was on World in Focus, and I made very clear where I stood on it. Christians will differ on that, but I will get Tony to share his side of things today and why he believes what he believes.
Okay.
Thanks, Tony.
All right. Start off with, in the scriptures, when Jesus came the first time, he fulfilled one set of prophecies. There were some prophecies he didn't fulfill. So it's clear from looking at the Old Testament prophecies that the Messianic program actually took place in 2 stages. You have the suffering servant Messiah of Isaiah 53. You also have the reigning king Messiah in Isaiah 2, where it says the nations will beat swords into plowshares, spears into pruning hooks. So I guess at the time when Jesus came, this was also an issue, because it was, because you can see in the Gospels that people were saying, well, when Jesus said he was going to go up to Jerusalem to be killed, to die, and to be buried and rise again from the dead, even the disciples said that's not supposed to happen. That's not part of the Messianic program. We want the Messiah to come and to bring about the Messianic kingdom of peace now. And Jesus showed that first of all he had to die, suffer, be buried, rise again from the dead, ascend to heaven, and return at a future date. Now, if you look at the prophecies of the New Testament of the second coming of Christ, if you're going to take them literally, and I believe the only way to take prophecy is to take it literally, because once you start spiritualizing it, you can really make it say what you want it to say. There has to be 2 stages to the program, because in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, it says, "This we say to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord will by no means precede those who are asleep. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. Thus we shall always be with the Lord. Therefore comfort one another with these words." Now, a plain meaning of that is that there's a day coming when a trumpet's going to sound, the dead in Christ will rise first, then those who are alive will be caught up to meet the Lord in the air. You then have another set of prophecies, particularly Revelation 19, which speaks about the Lord coming, this time as King of Kings and Lord of Lords, coming back to the earth to destroy the armies of the Antichrist, the beast and the false prophet. Satan will then be bound during a 1,000-year period, and the Lord will reign during that 1,000-year period. So you have the saints being caught up and the saints coming down with the Lord. So those 2 things can't be
together
exactly the same event. So therefore you have, if you like, 2 stages of the second coming. Now the issue is, how far apart are they? And this is where you have all this debate about the rapture.
Right.
Are they 7 years before? So the rapture comes 7 years before, and you then have the tribulation period, during which time the events of Revelation 6 to 19 take place, which have the final action, which is the armies gathering at Armageddon, ties in with Old Testament prophecies as well, and the second coming of Christ to the earth at that time. So you have a 7-year gap between the rapture and the coming of the Lord to the earth. During that 7-year gap, the world is evangelized by the tribulation saints, and particularly by the 144,000 who, again, if you take it literally, are Jews who accept Jesus as Messiah. Great multitude are saved, many of them put to death, then resurrected when Christ returns. The saints who've been raptured go to the marriage supper of the Lamb, get new bodies, come back riding on white horses, and reign with Christ during the 1,000 years. The alternative to that is that it happens at the end of the tribulation. There is another one actually where it comes halfway through, which is the mid-tribulation rapture. So the Christians are here for the first 3.5 years of trouble, Then when the Antichrist brings in the mark of the beast halfway through, we're raptured, and then the final wrath period, the Great Tribulation, is the last 3.5 years. Or the post-tribulation rapture, that the saints go up and pretty much come down at the same time.
Right.
My view is actually that the first one has a lot going for it.
Right.
Because that's the only way it can be immediate. It can happen as a thief in the night, unexpectedly.
Because we don't know any other time.
The other one, if it's at the end of the tribulation and you've had 3.5 years of the mark of the beast and the armies are gathering at Armageddon, it's not such a shock if Jesus shows up.
Obviously, I think there's no question that one of the things you do want to show them is the love of God and God's love for all people, isn't it?
And actually, many Israelis would like to live in peace with the Palestinians and not have a conflict with them. The problem from Israel's point of view is that because of the organizations like Hamas and some of the Fatah organizations as well, they have in their program the destruction of the state of Israel.
Yes.
So as far as Israel is concerned, they can't just sort of open the borders and say let's all mix in together and trade and so on. I mean, Israel does actually take food and stuff into Gaza.
Yes.
But the problem is with the desire to destroy Israel.
Yes.
I mean, I was at a meeting the other week, actually, which was from kind of left-wing peace movement for Israelis and Jewish people, and they were saying that they wanted to have a two-state solution to withdraw from the territories, let the Palestinians have their state, live at peace together. But a lot of it actually was quite naive, because that assumed that the Palestinians want to have a two-state solution and to live at peace with Israel.
Yeah.
Whereas the problem actually is that many of the Palestinian leadership wants to have a one-state solution, which is to drive the Jews out of Israel and have Islam, an Islamic Arab state, basically ruling from the Jordan to the Mediterranean. And obviously Israel doesn't want that to happen, so they're going to defend themselves.
That's right.
It's, of course, the great problem of our age, which engages the minds of the best minds of our generation, I guess, and that also fits in with the scriptures where it says that Jerusalem will be that burdensome stone burdening your nations.
Yes.
Now, the fact that it's prophetic doesn't mean that we don't care about the Palestinians, and there are people who are seeking to help them and to... But the issue does come down to whether Israel's going to survive or not. And Israel knows that it only has to lose one more, and that's the end. They can't actually put themselves in a position where they put all the barriers down, they don't have any security, someone just comes in and Israel is destroyed. So,
Tony, as you said, you'd like to stick to some of the Jewish
Celia said, which helpful. The thing about Jacob, in Genesis 32, Jacob wrestles with a man, and then the man says to him, your name shall no longer be called Jacob but Israel, for you've struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. And then he asks his name, and he blessed him there. And then Jacob calls the name of the place Peniel, for I've seen God face to face, my life is preserved. So we're seeing that this man who Jacob wrestles with actually is the Lord.
Yes.
Because he calls his name Peniel.
Yeah.
And this is significant because one of the major objections of which Jewish people have to Jesus becoming, to our faith actually, is the idea that God could become man and appear in a human form. And therefore, the whole idea of the incarnation of Jesus becoming flesh and dwelling amongst us is something which Rabbinic Judaism dismisses. And yet in the Torah, particularly in the book of Genesis, you have a number of occasions where the Lord appears in a visible form which is human. In Genesis 3, where the Lord walks and talks in the garden, so he can walk. In Genesis 18, the Lord appears to Abraham, and he eats, and it's clear actually that it is the Lord who eats there.
Right.
And here you have the Lord appearing or the man appearing who Jacob recognizes as the Lord who he wrestles with. So we've actually got three very physical activities, walking, eating, and wrestling, all applying to the Lord.
Right.
So we would call those theophanies or appearances of the Lord in the Old Testament, and this is one of the reasons why we can say that Jesus can appear in human form, that he already did. He who was God became flesh and dwelt amongst us.